All right, guys, welcome to our webinar series. We have two amazing gentlemen here from industry who are going to talk to us about design. And in particular, as you heard our discussion before we get started officially here, some of the topics that we're going to touch on today, fundamentally going to question, how you go about doing your design. And I think you can learn a lot from these two gentlemen on today's webinar. But a quick introduction to Michael Denham. He did graduate from RMIT University in 2008 with a Bachelor of Design, Industrial and Product Design. So as he mentioned earlier in our discussion, he is not an engineer, but I'm sure that he thinks very much like an engineer with a much more creative angle to problem solving and designing products and services that are valid to all of us. So Michael has worked in various areas before. He was an intern for Tourist Automotive, and surprisingly, I also did an internship with Tourist when I was an undergraduate. And I can see we're the same generation as well, Michael, so small world. Michael then worked as a creative designer for Jayco from 2007 to 2008, and he worked as a designer for Kaiser Bus, designing and defining KB product range, along with a strong focus on structural packaging, graphics, and branding. And for the last almost 10 years, Michael has been working for a company called Outerspace Design. That's the company that he's working for today. And so is Harry, and they're going to talk to us a little bit about that to come. And in this particular role, Michael is the creative design manager, and he manages a talented team of creative designers that create innovative, exciting products. And they work with clients in Australia, the US, and across Asia, and gives them a unique and global perspective when designing. Now, what I also wanted to add to all of this is that I went through the webpage of Outerspace, and one thing that particularly struck me is how catchy and creative not only the company was, but also how creative some of the wording around what they actually do. And so I'm just going to read a couple of lines from the About Us section here, which I thought are very, very clever. And what it says about Outerspace is that we are a small group with a great design sense, a deep understanding of markets and people, and gutsy visions of what a product can be. Give us a challenging problem, our eyes light up, adrenaline kicks in, imaginations go into overdrive. We work hard, we work late, we collaborate, we get resourceful, we inspire one another and create magic. Get it done. For those with big ambitions, those with dreams, and those with an open mind, we are Outerspace Design. So I thought that is one of the best About Us sections that I've read in my entire life. Really, really like that. And hopefully the students that are on this webinar will take heed of some of the wording there and the, I guess, creative ways that you can describe yourself rather than just using the bland corporate language that everyone else uses. So Michael, Harry, welcome. Harry, I'm going to allow you to just say a few words about yourself as well. I know Michael's given the webinar, you're going to be answering some of the questions, but maybe you want to add a few words as well.
All right. So I'm Harry Holden. I'm a product designer, but I work predominantly on the engineering team here at Outerspace Design. I graduated from Monash in 2016 with a degree in industrial design. So I'm not actually a formally trained engineer, but I've always been more mechanically minded. And I've worked previously with Team Unlimited Australia, who 3D prints prosthetics for children with limb deficiencies and minor amputations. And yeah, and I've been working with Outerspace for about 3 years now.
And that, Harry, welcome to the presentation as well. Michael, we're going to hand it over to you. The show is all yours. If you want to add anything to what I've said about you on your introduction, please feel free to do that. And,
well, I've got a little bit of an intro in the presentation I put together, so I'll sort of run through that. Let me know when you can see that page.
Absolutely. We are ready to rock and roll.
Okay. All right. Well, like Eddie said, I work for Outerspace Design. This is actually a picture of our old studio. We've recently moved to Abbotsford about 1.5 years ago. We have a team of about 25 people, so it's a bit of a mixture. So a little bit about myself. I don't need to say too much. I've worked at Outerspace for 10 years. Would have worked on, I reckon, easily 1,000 projects in that time. But based on the role I have, I I have probably less involvement than an engineer would have, but I do a lot of direction setting early on. So I touch a lot of projects. So this is, you know, across a broad range of things: consumer, automotive, medical, technical products. I started as a designer and now I lead the creative team. So we've got 4 people in the creative team, whereas we have 25-ish. I think it varies depending on contractor levels, but about 25 across the company in a range of different positions. You can sort of see a few different examples. I like motorbikes, so I sketch a few motorbikes in my free time, but I've worked on 3D printers, caravans, consumer electronics products, but really broad mix of stuff. Again, this is our old studio, but it's a pretty similar environment. We have, in the old studio, we had 2 stories. We had sort of meeting rooms and sort of shared spaces on the lower level, and then the big studio upstairs. In the current one, we have the meeting rooms at the front. We have a large sort of open plan studio with everybody sort of laid out. We've got kind of creative, mechanical and electronics engineering. We also have a couple of different labs. We have a clean electronics lab and what we'll call it, I guess, a dirty engineering type mock-up building lab as well. So it's got saws and it's generally, you know, a lot more of a, I guess, a hands-on environment, people building things, cutting wood, cutting metal, you know, quick and dirty type stuff. And then we also like to just have a very open plan environment, a very sort of open plan approach. People can go and talk to people. You know, it's not sort of too cubicalized, if you will. We also have a studio in San Diego as well. So we've got 3 people over there. So it's a little bit of a satellite office, a couple of engineers and some biz dev. And yes, we get probably about 1/3 of our work from the States. So it's, you know, really good. We've had some really good anchor clients from America in the past. We work a lot with Silicon Valley startups as well, because it's obviously sort of a big area that's on that West Coast. So it's really good to get sort of a good range of international projects as well. Yep, so we have a good mix. Fred is our director, so he's owned and run Outerspace for 30 years. So we've been, I think it's 30 years this year. So it's probably older than most people on this call. And we have, like I was saying, a broad range of industrial designers, product design engineers, mechanical engineers, and electronics. So a sort of good variety of people. We work very kind of openly across teams. I know I've talked to a lot of people in automotive, for instance, and they have a lot more of, I guess, us versus them mentality between design and engineering. And we sort of don't like to run that way. We like to run very openly, have very good relationships between the team members, because we find, you know, it's a lot easier to design stuff when you can go and talk to someone and ask them questions, and there's no kind of politics in the way of it. It's just about creating the best products. So we've worked with a lot of different people in a lot of different fields. So some big brands like Ford. Lifeproof is a really good example of one. We helped them design their first product, and they went from an Australian man, a startup, and he went through and sold his company to Otterbox a few years later for a very large amount. So really good success story. We've worked with, you know, in the communication space, the home spaces, industrial spaces, so a really broad range of fields and materials and techniques. So like I was saying, here's a sort of quick grab of some of the product stuff, looking at the Lifeproof cases, some of the other consumer electronics. We do a fair bit of work with startups. Fusion's a good example of one, the guitar on the bottom left. That was actually a startup that one of the guys working for Outerspace came up with, and Outerspace helped support him through that process. And now he's become, I guess, a separate independent company selling guitars. That went on through Indiegogo and raised $500,000. So it's been relatively successful, and it's a pretty cool little product, a good mix of, I guess, design and engineering and electronics. So good multifaceted design there. and a few other sort of examples of good startups. We've done a bit of work in automotive and accessories. So we have worked, like I was saying, for Ford, doing some sort of OEM stuff, but there is still a really good opportunities in Australia for automotive accessories. I don't know if many of you know, but especially in the 4x4 space, like whilst automotive OEM design is sort of on, I guess, on the retreat at the moment, the accessory space is doing really well. There's a really big boom in sort of outdoor and camping type products, especially when it comes to accessorizing utes and things. So we've seen quite a lot of work in that space, things like that Contract Sports utility bed in the top corner. And you know, we've worked with a lot of the big players like ARB and TJM, and then worked with a few more sort of government-based type ones like that police car. We've also done a reasonable amount of work in medical. We don't specialise in it like a few of the other companies in Australia, but we think it's a really valuable space. It's nice to work on products that are having sort of real genuine impact. We've worked on things like epilepsy monitors. We do a lot of the front end, looking at the human factors, the usability of the products. Like with Compumedics, for instance, we've been into the children's hospital. We've talked with the clinicians. We've tried to design products around empathetic design and designing for the systems and processes they have in place. So making sure that what we're designing is the right thing. We've also done a bit of work in structural packaging. So this wasn't something I was aware of before I sort of finished uni, but it's actually a reasonably big field in industrial design, and more and more so in eco design these days as well. But designing things, trying to use sustainable materials. But we've done some materials stuff with molded pulp and card, and trying to shift brands away from using injection molded plastics into more sustainable materials. So it's quite an interesting area. We also do a bit of UX UI. So more and more products are becoming digital these days. So trying to design full system experiences. So making sure the product and the digital experiences are sort of working together. Like the Swan 1 system at the top right, we did all the industrial and mechanical design for the actual products, but then we built all the usability and aesthetics behind the system, the UX UI system. So it became a sort of holistic, aesthetically pleasing overall product system. And then we also do a little bit of visualization, so animations and marketing and rendering type images to support what the clients have. We've done a lot of images for Kickstarter campaigns and product websites, so trying to really sort of enhance what they could be. So this is the InnerSpace program. This is what I was sort of talking about. We did this a few years ago for the Fusion guitar, and we've been looking recently at a few others. It's I guess it's about two different sort of ideas, the push and the pull. So the push being identifying strategic areas and designing for it. That's probably more what we've been doing in the current environment. And then the pull was the employee idea. So that's what Fusion was. So that obviously went through crowdfunding and then raised further through external capital raising, and now it's an independent company selling worldwide. Change slides. There we go. So I've put together, I've got a couple more sections. I've got a day in the life, so it gives you a quick snapshot of the kind of things I would do in a day. And then I've got a little bit about our design process and a few examples of a strategic case study. So for me, I obviously start work with a coffee. I think everybody does. What we like to do is actually get in and have a client workshop with all the products. So when we're starting out with a design, we like to actually physically talk to the client. Obviously we're not doing it physically at the moment, but getting down and dirty and asking the sort of hard questions about why the product does this and really doing a deep dive. We often like to have a proper workshop with the client, because sometimes it's actually helped really either helped us understand it better or even sometimes redefined what the client thinks it should be. So, you know, we think it's really important, and we like to sort of develop, I guess, a personal connection with both the client and the problem they're trying to solve. We think, you know, making things personal can be really good because it gives you a little bit of extra drive, whereas, you know, if you just treat everything a bit cold, especially in a sort of human-centered field, it's good to have, you know, your head in that space. We do a fair bit of desktop research before we get into designing things. So that's looking online, doing competitor analysis, trying to find out about trends in the marketplace. We have a bit of an axis of business, market and user, and we try to tick as many boxes off before we actually design things to get a real understanding of the scope and all the different aspects involved in a project. We often try and get on site if possible as well. So like I was saying before, we've been into hospitals and we've observed and we've asked questions. We're big believers in observational design beyond just asking questions. We think, you know, if you have the sort of trained eye and you're looking for certain things, you can see problems and see issues that potentially people don't even realize are there. So for instance, with this construction site, we were looking at concrete panel props. So those big bars that they're holding up with. When we went through this, we identified a number of issues handling. We looked at the whole process going from unloading at the truck, how they bring it onto site, how they assemble it. And we sort of categorized it all. We figured out all the issues. We watched them do it as well as asking questions. And we found some things were the same, but some things, you know, we saw some things that potentially they didn't even realize, and we came up with a number of solutions that can address that. We often then, once we understand the relevance of, and their background behind the project, we come up with brainstorming. So we'll get in a room, we'll have a bunch of people from different backgrounds. We find having good diverse backgrounds does help with giving you good diverse ideas, but we come up with a whole load of different ideas, and we use a lot of different tools from some of the design training we've done to come up with some really cool ideas and rank them based on sort of science-based techniques rather than, you know, what's the personal preferences. Then we essentially take those ideas, we build on them further and turn them into actual concepts. We might then go through all the different concepts, have a quick review with management, potentially sometimes with the client as well, and take them further, do refined sketches. So you can sort of see that's a good example of some accessories on a 4x4. And then once we translate those into, for me, I don't tend to be involved in the CAD design. So Harry, for instance, would be doing a lot of this sort of in-between step from that high-end sketch through to the CAD design, but I might do a sort of a surface review with someone like Harry. And, you know, we do a bit of pushing and pulling, and it's where you get a really good backwards and forwards. And this is potentially where, if you don't have that good open dialogue and relationship with the designers, you get a bit of a disconnect, but we find that this tends to work quite well. And it is a back and forth. So for instance, there may be things that come up throughout the engineering process that we weren't aware of during design. So some, you know, there may be some technical issues or some hard points that the design has to change a little bit. And this is where, you know, if the designer wasn't involved, it may go down the wrong path. But if you re-involve the designer, you can essentially look at it again, potentially have another round of iteration and come up with something that then takes into account all those technical things a little bit more. So really, really important. Do you want to chip in?
If I can just interject for a second, so typically when we get to this stage of the process, I like to think of it, it definitely comes up as more of a conversation at this point. So I will typically take sketches that Mike has done, stuff them into a SolidWorks folder and begin and begin a modeling based off that. But at this point, that's when we start factoring in decisions like dimensions and proportions in relation to human beings and everything. And then I will make my best guesses based on that decision, or consult with Mike about the intention of the design, and it becomes a real big back and forth push and pull. So we get this wonderful marriage between the design and its integrity and intention, and a utilitarian view of designing the most ergonomic, the most resourceful thing for production and for the end consumer.
Yeah, thanks, Harry. And then once we sort of go through all the design and engineering and the DFM processes, we'll do a range of parts reviews. These will probably happen at several sort of stage gates throughout the process, going from first prototype, second prototype, and then off-tool parts, and then final production parts. And we go through and review them and check them and make sure that everything's up to scratch. So that would be probably a pretty cram day, but pretty standard for the kind of tasks I would take out. Harry, yours would probably be a little bit different, a little bit more CAD work, but we still like to, Harry still comes to all the client meetings and understands, the drivers behind the project.
Yeah, being divorced from any one stage of the process does always make it a little bit harder. Of course, there's some things that it's kind of redundant to have me there for, or all these sort of things, but having this ongoing knowledge and relationship with the design team and the engineering team and the electronics team I think it definitely results in a better product. Like having this people with scraps of knowledge that make those conversations easier and everything, it just always improves the overall process and the end result.
Yeah, and I think that sort of blends nicely into our development process. Now, this is one we've sort of worked up ourselves, but it's probably pretty similar to a few of the other ones out there. There's sort of the double diamond approach. There's a few different schools of thought behind design processes, but essentially we've broken it down into two main phases. And essentially that's defining the right product and then designing the product right. Now, a lot of people are very keen to rush into designing the product, but we think it's really important to make sure what you're designing is the right product to start with, because if you go through, and it doesn't matter if it's the world's best engineered product, if it's not the right product for the market, if it's not the right product for a whole number of different reasons, it's not what the user wants or needs, then it won't work, it won't sell. So if you get what the right product is, you stand a much higher chance of success in the marketplace. It's also about risk reduction as well. So you can, it does cost more to do that phase of work up front, but the cost, the risk versus reward is a lot better if you can find that sort of extra motivation up front, because you're reducing the risk of failure of the product in the marketplace going through to production. And some of the costs involved in actually producing a product, whether it's tooling and production runs, they're huge costs. So if you can make sure that the risk going through to that phase is reduced through strategy at the start, then that it makes so much sense. So that starts with understanding what the problem is. So really going, what is this problem, and breaking it down into sort of smaller steps. So we start with what we call a problem statement, and we go through and we do as much research as we can. So that's very specific based on what the problem is, but that can involve on-site visits, that can involve desktop research, involve interviews. So we collect as much data relevant to the problem as we can, so we're making informed concept decisions. So we go through, we analyze that, we reframe the problem or define it further. So we create sort of what we call design challenges. So that lets us go through the define phase, so where we do a lot of brainstorming and concept ideation. And then what we come out with the end is essentially a product specification. So you're going into the next phase going, this is exactly what the product should do, this is what it should be, we often have a bit of a sort of vision sketch of it too. But essentially, you're not going through a product development process still not knowing a lot of questions. So through the product specification should be quite clear on a number of areas. It should be clear on the target audience, how it's positioned against the other products in the marketplace, what the brand attributes are behind the products. You know, another number of things. It can be some of the aesthetic decisions, some of the technical decisions. Obviously, the functionality is a massive one. So what functional features should it have? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to ground all of those decisions in good research and analysis based on what your problem is and the best way to solve it. So you're not going through designing a product not knowing any of these things. You know it and you can justify it. And we find it's really important to take the engineers through that process as well and inform them on it, because there's still going to be decisions that have to be made as you go through a technical process. And if the engineers, the people doing it, understand the real reasons behind these things, they're making decisions in the right way, they're making the right kinds of decisions with the end goal in mind that's based on that upfront work.
And having that document, that clear vision helps the design stay not only consistent throughout the whole process, but it really helps make decisions later on. So by having that product specification clearly defined, it means that as this thing passes through the team, everyone has the same image in their head of what is required and what is needed, and it allows other members of the team to make informed decisions on the design in all its various stages. So, you know, even if Mike doesn't have access or even the knowledge base required to make a certain engineering decision, it really helps our team establish, all right, so this needs to be produced like this because people are going to interact with it in a certain way.
Yep, that's right. Thanks, Eric. So I've got a quick example of a design strategy case study. So this is for an Australian brand called Goldline. They sort of make cooktops. They sell through Good Guys. They're essentially a brand that had a very niche product. They sort of sold these replacement ones for a particular size. The problem was over time, all of these were slowly being replaced. So they basically had a diminishing market. They just didn't really know what they wanted to do with the product and where to go. So what they really needed was some design strategy to help with that. So that's where we sort of came in and we helped them looking at a brand overview. So we went into a number of different Good Guys stores. We looked at all the sort of general competitors and how they were laid out, how they were priced. And we looked at, you know, how can we push the brand perception of Goldline a little bit higher so they're not a budget player. So they were a more premium offering because their prices were premium, but what they're offering was not. We went through a number of in-store interviews. So we talked to key stakeholders. We looked at the strengths and the weaknesses of their current product, what people thought. As you can sort of see, there were a lot more weaknesses than strengths, but that's not necessarily an issue at the start of this. Looking at both marketing and product related things to help inform the design process. We also did a little bit of research onto essentially who would be the key buyers for this. And we basically looked at the Good Guys markets tends to be renovators. So we did, through further research, we broke this down to 4 key areas. So looking at first homeowners, the growing family, the teenage family, and downsizers. So they tended to be the key points where someone would do a renovation. And what we were able to do is then break it down further into some of the key things they want through this renovation process, what they're looking for in a product. So first homeowners, for instance, more space conscious. They are budget conscious, will invest in quality. They tend to renovate to increase the value of the property long term. They are experimental with food and they're buying for entertaining, and they're more likely to buy a 60 centimetre rather than 90 centimetre because they are that space conscious buyer. So when you sort of see, you can break it down into your key different product groups and start to drive some of the key product drivers behind what the users want out of the product. We also did a little bit of research into Victoria because we realised that this was an Australian brand that primarily selling within Victoria. And if you actually look at the gas usages within Australia, Victoria was 76% of gas usage within Australia. So what this sort of led to was Victoria is actually one of the biggest markets for this brand and this product. So what we wanted to do is really drive it behind Victorian diversity and Victorian multiculturalism. So again, when you look into the numbers, you realise that Victoria is very multicultural, and to ignore that especially in something food related is huge, because food is such a cultural driver behind the way people make decisions. And it's you know, when you look at those numbers, 46.8% of Victorians are either born overseas or have at least one parent born overseas. So you can imagine the influence that would have on the decisions of people moving when they're buying a product. So what we did was we took all of the research and we went away and we did a bit of a brainstorming exercise behind different themes that we could come up with for this product. So we wanted to build the product a bit more around a story than around product features. So we came up with this idea of sizzle and simmer. The idea was it was diverse cuisines and diverse cultures, and what people are looking for is they're looking for both power and control. And we looked at the way people were cooking. They want sort of two general schools of thought. So there was the high intensity of heat and the good distribution to cook with power, and then the high level of finesse and the low heat for control. So they were sort of the key drivers behind the story we were building. And then the other thing was we were looking at was more space for real cooks. So through the market analysis, we realized that a lot of the 90 centimeter products were using 5 burners, and you actually can't use 5 burners effectively because the space it takes up. So what we were looking for was a more generous layout that lets people cook in a less cramped way. They can use bigger pans, and using those sort of two key pan, which was the sizzle and simmer. So the combination of a high power one and a finesse. So we sort of built this story around it, and instead of having 5 crammed in, we wanted this more generous layout for real cooks. We looked at the brand values. What were the values behind the product? Great, simple design, Australian made, quality, and made for the real world. Let's look at the business case. And then sort of started to build a brief around what it must be, you know, high build quality, high quality knob feels, easy to clean, what to avoid and how you're going to stand out. So selling the story. We looked into kitchen trends as well. So simplicity, texture, precious metals, and architectural trends. So this is more about I guess some of the social aspects as well. So the home hub, compact living, and then also on the other end of the spectrum, larger appliances. Some of the social trends, so how people are cooking, what they're doing with it, they're sort of cooking long and low trends. And then also at aesthetics, so looking at style themes, what is this going to look like? We generally come up with several different style themes and sort of build concepts around those. So you can sort of see at 2 different ends of the spectrum. So the organic ones versus the Crisp Geo. Then we go through a large range of concept development. So we start in 2D. So you can sort of see with this one, we did a lot of Illustrator-based 2D layout type design. And then we built that up into CAD and built a series of quick concept CAD models. And go ahead.
Using programs like Illustrator can really help, like, get these quick really high fidelity formats out. Like, Mike, how many of these designs would you be able to pump out? Like, because we've had several projects where Mike has explored these formats in 2D in programs like Illustrator, and then infinitely faster than we can explore them in any 3D format. And you can see right there that, like, you get a really good, really strong idea for how the program works, like for what the finished product would look like.
Yeah, and this is the classic case of sketching versus CAD. I can probably do, you know, in 2 or 3 days, smash out 50 to 60 different versions of a design in something like Illustrator or some, you know, sketching by hand. And what we tend to do is we like to get those ideas down really quickly at first. So that one in the middle, for instance, is like an Illustrator rendering. So that's the kind of example. I'd have pages and pages of those, and then we would do a bit of a design review, select the key ones, and then to present, we came up with 5 or 6 different CAD models, sort of at a more, I guess, more refined level, where the client could understand it better. So that's the sort of design we came up with, and that one is going through the commercialization process at the moment. But there's quite a few sort of small things built into this. So things like being able to break the trivet into 2 pieces so that it can be put into a dishwasher. People not understanding whether the gas was on when it was low. So we built these little LED indicators around the knobs. I'm sure you've all left gas cooktops on by accident because you couldn't see the flames. So that was one of the sort of good key user insights. We looked at glass versus stainless steel, and another big one was the dual control burners on the outside. So they essentially have a dual ring, but they go from double ring down to single. So you don't have to move pans from one cooktop spot to another. You can keep it in place. So you can have that high heat to start with and then turn it down and leave it in the same spot. So you're not having to shift a big 30-centimeter pan across the hob. So those are the kind of key insights we gained through the research that we carried through into the product through little details and functional things that turn it from something that's, a nice looking product, which is in itself something, but trying to really enhance it with all those little details and the thoughtfulness and the little features that turn it from a good product into a great product. And they liked the story so much, they actually used it for all their product messaging and their marketing as well. So the gold line for real cooks, and talking about the sizzle and the simmer of the different cooking styles. So that's a good example of, we're not a marketing agency, but we came up with a sort of, a theme that really resonated with where they position the brand moving forwards. So I'll just quickly go through some of the other products. That's sort of a good case study of some of the strategy, but there's LifeProof. So they went from startup to 300 mil in 5 years. So again, a really good success story. That one was a lot more engineering based. So it's a waterproof and drop proof phone case range. So a lot of really sort of detailed engineering to do with sealing, and cracking and drop, and a lot of very detail-oriented design. Already talked about the Fusion, but that was a crowdfunding success, and we got it into a whole range of different things, won a few design awards. Robo 3D, so we did a range of 3D printers for them, and we managed to get it from concept into production in 12 months, which for what is a fairly complicated product is very rapid. Clever Pets, so that's an example of bringing, a new type of technology to an industry that's very kind of a bit slow. So the pet industry, this was creating almost like a little games console, thinking about dogs that are left at home, they're bored, they've got nothing to do. So, how do you keep them entertained? How do you avoid the guilt factor of the owners leaving the owners at home, leaving the dogs at home? So they've even come up with, we've worked with them more recently on a version that actually has a camera integrated as well, so the owners can log in and see how their dog's going and see how much they've been interacting with the product as well. Again, so looking at Swan, with this product, they just did product sourcing. So they sourced little black boxes from China and put their name on it. And what essentially we did was we took them from product sourcing to disruptive innovation. So this was a new product. We gave them a whole range of accessories that go with it. So we wanted something that was a little bit more like a homewares product, a little bit softer, and it can sit loud and proud in the home. And it's something that's people are a lot more comfortable with. It's a lot less kind of an eyesore as well. And that shows the sort of range of sensors that go with it. And then we've talked briefly about the ComTrack as well. So looking at the functionality of a sort of aluminium or steel tray, but with a more kind of OEM standard aesthetics. So having painted sides, having kind of smooth profiles that fit the curves of the vehicle, but still having those drop down sides, the tight amp points throughout, you know, really amping up the functionality. Also discussed that one. Here's another good example of, I guess, a mesh of multidiscipline design. So this is a VR camera. So this has 16 different HD cameras throughout it. So it's good for, you know, you put it in a concert, you can experience it firsthand. But they came to us with this concept, but we helped them with a lot of the technical challenges in bringing it together. So you can imagine 16 cameras with the chips all actually produces a lot of heat. So we did a lot of computational fluid dynamics to understand the heat paths. We created a bit of, I guess, you can see in the top ring, there's an intake. What happens is the air gets sucked in through there. There's a fan at the bottom. It pulls the heat away from the chips and out through the top. So there's a bit of a chimney effect going on. So what that enabled them to do was create a product that could be placed outside in the sun and wouldn't overheat. And we also looked at, I guess, a lot of the functional aspects, the placement of all the cables, the buttons. That, again, there's a lot of different cooling elements throughout as well. Done a few kind of smaller medical products like eye marking devices and Compumetics as well. So that's a epilepsy monitoring system. So we're actually working on a new product with them soon that should be out in the next few months, hopefully. That's I guess the next gen of this one. So a lot smaller and a lot higher functionality. We also do some of the supporting things, like this trolley was designed to house all the different accessories in a way that can be easily moved around. Worked on some large scale products too. So this is a big industrial metal printer. You can sort of see in the middle, it's like a bit of a robotic welder. So it works that way, but we help them design all of the exterior housing, looking at how it's constructed, how the sort of user interfaces with it. So quite an interesting one.
And it's an interesting point on that one is that sometimes the deliverable isn't necessarily a product. Not everyone wants to walk away with a finished design. So this one was mainly was to produce an animation that was to get further investment, in which case we'd continue with producing the design, if I'm not mistaken, Mike.
Yeah, and they've actually they've received extra funding and done a later round of design updates since this one. So, yeah. And the last little thing, I guess, is some observations of in-house design versus ID firm. So I've worked a little bit in-house. I've also worked with a lot of different designers and engineers across a range of fields. And this is sort of some of my observations of in-house versus ID. So timeframes. So in an ID firm, we tend to be very heavily compressed. It's dependent on the client's funding and the client's deadlines. So we don't always necessarily get to spend the amount of time we would like on things. So really a lot of it comes down to I guess, the best we can do within those timeframes and with the client's budget. So we've got to be very efficient and be very kind of mindful of all these different aspects. multiple projects, so 6 to 8 at once is fairly common. So this is how I've managed to work on so many projects over time, is I would have typically between 6 and 8 projects. Harry, you probably have more sort of 2 to 4, is that right?
Yeah, it's typically 2 to 4, mostly just because there's a bit, we have to go quite in depth with it, and usually stick with the project from, you know, from the initial CAD to the prototyping phase, and then usually we'll carry that on to DFM, or design for manufacturing, which is when we're consulting with the companies that's actually producing these goods, and having a back and forth there. That is, you know, what needs to be changed in the design in order for it to become a real tangible product.
Yeah, and you know, that's one of the big differences. I've talked with a few people working in-house, and they might have sort of 1 to 2 projects on the go, and they'd be sort of bigger and slower, whereas we'll be working, I guess, faster on lots of smaller projects, and across a huge range of different fields as well. Simplest and fastest commercial route to market. So especially this is quite interesting when you talk to automotive. So in automotive, they tend to design stuff to look right. So we, for instance, have had quite a few automotive guys work in-house, especially in quite senior positions, and they've had to almost change some of their expectations on what's good and what's good enough. So what we really try and push for is the simplest and fastest commercial route to market. So trying to avoid feature creep, trying to go, what are the key drivers? And this is really where the strategy is important, because you can ground your decisions on what is really necessary for commercial success based on your research. So you know the product has to do this. And we often create a list of must-haves and nice-to-haves for the product, so that we don't get too caught up in, oh, it must have this and must have that, when they're actually just nice-to-haves. You don't really need them. And they can actually add a lot of, I guess, a lot of lag and a lot of delay to projects. We often push people to go, well, what's your minimum viable product for your first product, especially in the startup space? And develop that, because, you know, you get that sense of, it's lower risk, it's lower investment, but you also, the make or break happens with something quicker, and it gives you an opportunity to create the version 2 product further down the road when you've got a bit more capital behind you, a little bit more of, I guess, a proven track record. And I guess the last thing is, we really do have a personal connection to the money source. We deal directly with the clients. We have a direct impact on the execution of the product, and it's kind of real consequences for real people. A lot of the clients we deal with are actually, you know, the startups. They're often people spending their savings. So you do feel a sense of responsibility to try and do your best. It's not like, I guess, you work for a large company, you sort of become a bit disconnected to the money. For us, it is quite personal sometimes, and we obviously don't want to waste people's money. We want to help them bring their visions to life and create real things. So it's definitely got some consequences in that respect.
Yeah, and I think Outerspace has also we've turned down several projects and concepts because we didn't believe that they would have, that we could have taken their money and developed the product anyway, but we just didn't believe that there was a place in the market for it as well.
Yeah, and we, in those cases, we often point them in directions of experts, or like, you need to go away and answer these questions before we develop it. So that's sort of a bit about us. So it'd be good to, I guess, answer some questions if people have some.
Yeah, I've typed an answer to one, Mike, because I accidentally somehow dismissed it. But I'd like to actually put this one out there, because it's one that pops up pretty often whenever we do these talks. What kind of software and knowledge is required to be a good design engineer?
I guess from my point of view, I'm a little bit less software based. I do a lot of sketching. Using Adobe Suite, we use the Google Suite a lot as well. So things like we use Google Slides and Google Docs instead of Microsoft, because we find they've got really good collaborative tools, so we can all share and work on things in real time.
A good free alternative to the Adobe suite for sketching as well is the Autodesk SketchUp, which is, I still think that's still free now.
I think so. I use Sketchbook Pro and a tablet for a lot of my kind of digital sketching.
Yeah.
And Adobe. And you use mainly SolidWorks, right, Harry?
Yeah, so I typically use SolidWorks to do pretty much everything. I am familiar with so ZBrush is a 3D sculpting program, which I'm familiar with. It hasn't quite been relevant to our product design development yet, but that is a software I'm familiar with. I like to always say with this one that it's always good to have a weird set of skills. So like the more diverse you are, so you never know when it's going to come in handy. For example, Enzo, who's on one of our team, he's brilliant with rendering. He uses Maya, 3ds Max, all those kind of animation and rendering and high fidelity modeling programs. But he also has a background in, like, he also knows how to use Adobe After Effects, which allows him to put, really high detailed text into videos and apply a lot of, like, whenever we do an animation, apply a lot of effects after the fact. So that's an interesting skill to have. I know how to use Cura, which is a 3D printing software. And even when I'm not 3D printing, whenever we send a prototype out, I know it helps me know the language and the specifications and to get a high quality model and some engine, and if it needs to have some mechanical properties, I know what dialogue to use with them so we can get the best result. So having a weird set of skills is always an asset.
Yeah. I see there's a couple of questions about material choices. So what we try and do with our material choices is we tend to ground them on the functional requirements of what it needs to do. So for instance, with some of the medical products we've been designing recently, we looked at some of the physical things they do with it, and we found that they clean a lot of their products with bleaches and harsh chemicals, and in previous products that's actually caused cracking issues. So what that does is it starts to build drivers behind what the material choices need to do. So we look at their cleanability, we look at biocompatibility, and it sort of creates a bit of a checklist. What we can then do is go to material suppliers, and they often have fact sheets behind what the different plastics are capable of, or what the different, the strengths of the metals are. And it creates a bit of a short list and helps us rank the best one. Behind that, we can choose materials based on that very early functional requirements, but also weigh that up against cost and environmental aspects. And there's never the perfect material. It's always a balance of different pros and cons, but that's generally how we select that. We go through and, even if there is a perfect material, it's probably really expensive. So, it comes down to price, functionality, and and availability.
And sometimes what we do during the DFM phase is when we're having that conversation with the manufacturer, the person who's actually going to produce the product, we ask them for their basis of knowledge. Or when we're getting a prototype produced, we go, we want it to have these properties. What do you recommend, and what method do you recommend? So while we try to make educated decisions based on our knowledge and the methods we design around to actually produce these things, a lot of the time the industry, they're the experts in the industry, and they typically have pretty good feedback, and they have their own suppliers who can help set that up. Yeah. Cool. So there's a lot of questions about how to get into the industry, Mike, as the person who actually hired me. So what do you look for when we're hiring someone at Outerspace?
It's often, I guess, dependent on the position we're looking for. So whether it's a technical person or a creative person. I obviously don't hire technical people, but I've seen some of the CVs. In I guess in a more creative role, we would look more at the folio and their experiences than at their CV, but it tends to be a little bit more the other way around in technical roles. In technical roles, it tends to be where have you worked, what kind of projects have you worked on, what kind of experiences have you had. Whereas in a creative role, we tend to look more for how does someone think, how do they process problems, how do they present those problems, and it's yeah, obviously folio versus CV are quite different things. But I think with all of it, we're still looking for people who can present themselves well and talk confidently, understand why they've designed what they designed, and talk about the design choices they've made, talk about, you know, even in engineering, it's why did you do it that way? How did you get to that solution? What challenges did you face? And being able to, a big thing I've always said and is the ability to tell a story. And humans always go back to stories. So if you can tell a story and present a story in what you've developed, that's very valuable. Yeah.
And just to emphasize that point, when I first applied for Outerspace Design, I was applying for a creative role. So I was looking to be on the creative team. So I came in with my portfolio and several designs that I'd completed in my final year of uni. And while they weren't really looking for a creative role, I explained to them, they asked questions and I explained to them my choices and the thinking behind my designs and how the technical minutiae. And I explained to them that I was a bit more technically minded than typically on the creative side of things. And I came back for a second interview for the Mech Eng team, and 3 years later, I'm still here. So it's, if you can explain your thinking and show them with confidence what, like, you know, how your choices are made, and if they're technically sound, then yeah, it can take you places.
Interestingly enough, guys, thanks for mentioning the storytelling, because there was a recent ranking of enterprise skills by Udemy. So obviously Udemy is not an authority in the sense that an authority would be a body that employs people or statistically looks at things. But they were looking at courses which were being taken globally by their users and ranking skills based on demand. And storytelling in the professional sense was ranked number 5 in soft skills. The ability to actually put things together and synthesize information in a logical manner and be able to explain them to a client, to whoever that might be on the other side, and well and truly understand it from your end so that you can tell it in the most simplistic form, or you can also go at the higher level. That was ranked as the number 5 most in-demand skill right now, which is quite incredible. It's a lot of change since the last 10 years in terms of the skills. So for the rest of the students, I will post that up on LMS so you guys can have a look at it. But very valuable, and thanks for mentioning that, Michael. Now I have a question for you guys, which I think some of the students will find very valuable. You talked about portfolios. We talked about, you know, demonstrating work outside of your normal working environment for students. That's the university. What can you tell students in terms of advice to develop a portfolio? So normally students go through the university degree, completing various projects which are compulsory as part of their academic workload. But what do you encourage students to do while you're a student that will give you a better opportunity to seize certain jobs that do require the types of presentations, portfolios, projects, etc., etc.? What would you advise yourself if you went back to when you were at university, and much like these guys here, that they can do now to put themselves in the driver's seat?
All right.
One of the big things I've seen, if you get a presentation full of nice renderings and you go, okay, that's good, but I don't get what they are. I don't get what the product is. I don't understand why you've gotten to that point. And I say the storytelling. It is, start out with the problem you're solving. Put that up there so people get it. And then go through, show the steps you went through to solve the problems, whether it's this is the particular part of the problem I was solving and I solved it using cardboard pieces of paper and sticky tape. If that's a valid way of showing it, then put it in your portfolio. don't do it in an ugly way, obviously, but you know, if you've solved a problem, show how you solved it, show your thought processes, and because I think that's what they're going to look for. People are going to hire you to solve problems for them. So they want to see how are you going to go about that. How do you do that? What are your thought processes in a visual way? Think about how you're going to talk through it as well if you do get an interview. And so you're going through that sort of step by step. I reached this issue and this is how I solved it. I reached this issue and this is how I solved it. And this is the end product. And they then understand what problem you were trying to solve, all the different issues you faced and how you overcame them. And then this is the final thing. And the final product then has such a higher resonance with the person looking at it than if you just showed them the end product.
Yeah, as a designer and as an engineer, you need to change your thinking. You are not there to spit out beautiful models, 3D renders, and nice sketches, though those definitely are helpful, but I'm not the strongest sketcher. I'm a much stronger 3D modeler, but my folio was full of sketches because the folio and everything you produce is about communication. It's about how to best convey your ideas to the person who is going to be viewing them. So, I mean, basic folio things is cut out as much text as possible because they're not going to read it. You want them to engage with you and just look at this visual, look at these visuals, and the visuals should just assist. The visuals are just there to assist in the narrative you are telling someone, the story of this product, which is really telling them a story about you and your skills and your thinking methods. And that's because that's ultimately what they're there to look at. You can have as many nice renders as you'd like, but if you're not showing that you've got that diverse thinking or this interesting skill set or big ideas, and key thing is always communication. Throughout Mike's presentation, he was talking about our team and how all the different parts work together. Those parts don't work unless we can communicate with each other. And the better you can do that, the better you will succeed in this industry.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. I think we do have a couple more questions. There's a question here for James Good. Do you find that clients tend to overlook similar issues when presenting ideas? For example, not accounting for electronics, if somewhat problems seem to pop up the most. So what problems seem to pop up the most when you're speaking to clients, and do they overlook certain key pieces of information when explaining things to you as the designer? I guess that's where James is going with the question.
I think, well, clients can often think things will be a lot simpler than they actually are. One of the big things we tend to do these days is essentially at the start of the project, do a feasibility study. So what that does is it's a smaller stage, but it's a little bit more of a deep dive, and then basically puts everyone on the same page. So you go, these are all the parts of the architecture we have to develop. This is how big the exercise is to develop them. Because it's very easy to, without, you'd probably need to at least spend a week or two on a reasonably complicated product to actually really understand all the aspects that go into it. And when you're trying to quote something like that and you're trying to understand the relative effort that goes into that, you do need to spend a bit of time on that and do a bit of research, you know, start looking at components, start looking at systems and breaking it down a little bit. So that's one of the big things we like to do, is we like to say, look, we think it's about this, but we want to do a feasibility study or a technical review at the start of the project. And then we can really understand it more. Because often clients, and everyone can, is they can fall into the trap of thinking something's simple. And I can tell you right now, even the simplest products are not simple. They're hard work.
They're actually the hardest ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say the biggest thing that we seem to run into is, so if we are working with someone who hasn't worked with this industry before or hasn't been involved in product design, the biggest thing is explaining to them what they're paying for, that to produce a good, viable product, to produce something that's going to sell and make it to market, or at least has the best chance of those, we need to explain to them what the process is, why we go through the process, and when we encounter a problem, we have to be able to explain that problem to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if they don't understand what's
done it a few times already. so they understand why it costs what it does and all the pain points. And when you hit those pain points, they understand why. You know, I guess one of the biggest things is a lot of clients expect things to work first time, and they never do. They literally never ever do. And if they do, it's a fluke. And that's why you have multiple rounds of iteration and prototyping. You know, everything works perfectly in concept land where I live, but I do understand that in the technical reality, the first prototype's going to have issues. That's why you build a prototype. That's why I don't go straight to tooling. It's so that you can test things and make it work.
Yeah, things are more fun in concept land, I can tell you that much.
They're not as serious. We have one more question, which was remaining from earlier on. Yep. And I want to try and articulate it in a way that it makes sense for this context here. The question was about the field of prosthetics and whether there's a lot of demand in society. And I guess in the context of this presentation, given the design work that you guys do for literally every type of, I guess, product field or vertical that from what I saw from the examples that you gave us, have you noticed anything about prosthetics that has showed a growing demand from a design perspective? Because people often think about prosthetics as, okay, yeah, anyone can just design an artificial, you know, some sort of limb or something that fits a missing limb and therefore it works. But there's a lot of design work that goes into it, and there are specific disciplines that are involved in designing prosthetics. But there's also the aesthetics, the look and feel, the product, etc. So can you delve on that topic at all?
I can field this one if you like, Mike.
You have that one, Harry.
Yeah. So I studied at uni as an industrial designer, which is predominantly product focused, but I had a major interest in prosthetics. And prosthetics is going through an interesting shift where up until 2000, it was predominantly an industry that was a medical practice so there's a specific degree, prosthetics and orthotics, which is mostly designed for people. It's people who produce prosthetics and various assistive devices for people with disabilities.
And La Trobe has that degree, by the way. So students, if you need to know more, you can go over there. Sorry, Harry.
Yeah. No, but recently it's been expanding outwards into product design as product design has become, because while prosthetics and orthotics as an industry is very focused on producing for the individual, there's certain costs that are prohibitive with that and everything. And ever since then, with 3D printing and all this new technology, it's been expanding outwards. I don't know if it's got increased demand, but there's definitely a bigger demand for more functional products that can help enrich people's lives. But if you are interested in prosthetics, my recommendation is to start looking into prosthetics designed for disability. There's a wonderful book called Designing for Disability. I can't remember who it's by, but it is, I'll email it to your lecturer. It was my Bible during university. Because a lot of these people with these assistive devices, they will have them for their entire lives. If you were born with a limb deficiency, you will go through 11 prosthetics before you turn 21. And so it is, and each one of those can cost anywhere between $1,000 to $10,000. So it's a big industry, and it doesn't get enough attention from product design, which is why we end up with ugly devices that are designed to be hidden. But if you're interested in design for disability, definitely look into that. There's huge movements in the medical space for moving to the home hospital, where people are being moved out of care and being moved out of hospitals and moved back home, where these devices allow them to have a higher quality of life, have their own home lives, be more independent, and, you know, live longer and fuller. So yeah, we've definitely had a lot of things in our space for designing for disability. There's definitely always a huge demand in the world for that, and they're asking for better and better devices that are more comfortable to use, more functional, cheaper to produce. It's a big industry.
Absolutely. Right, Daniel's also joined us in the meantime. Not sure if Daniel wants to throw in a couple of words here. I know he's been carefully listening in to the whole conversation. So, Dan, if you do want to say something, now's the time to say it.
Well, first of all, Michael and Harry, thank you guys so much for speaking today. I think the main thing that has come across to me is that you guys are really at the forefront of doing what we're trying to teach in the subjects, the innovation subjects at La Trobe. And the examples and the way you've described it today really, for me personally, grounds the theory that we're sort of trying to communicate to the students in fact. And you guys are really, executing these skills extremely well. So I just want to, reiterate that once again. Thank you so much, and for all the students who are still listening and those who watch this back later on, these guys are really doing what we're trying to teach you. So it's very inspiring, and yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ian.
And before we let you guys go, we did have one more question here. It's from an anonymous attendee, but I'm pretty sure it's one of our more active students. Hi, Michael. Does your inspiration for design come naturally? How has it improved since you began in the industry? That's a very good question.
I don't think it comes naturally. I think a lot of it comes down to process and structure behind the way you approach things. So I guess I personally have a bit of a playbook now that I can refer to and get things done really quickly, like a playbook of styles and a playbook of techniques that work really well for me. But it's not like a natural inherent thing I had. It's something, I got taught this is what you should do by people I used to work with, a bunch of techniques. And, it's doing like a market review and looking at all the different ones. And if you lay it out the right way, you can see opportunity, and you go, oh, there's opportunity over in this space, and this is what we should be looking at users, talking to users, pulling things out. You talk to people, you go, oh, yeah, that's interesting. And then it's how do you translate that into a product? It's looking at a whole bunch of other products out in the marketplace, trying to identify trends. It's just a lot of work, a lot of scouring, and a lot of analysis. And I think anyone can do it. I've taught quite a few people how to do it as well. We get interns in every year or two, and they come in, they don't know how to do it. At the end, a couple of years out, they're really killing it. They can scour through all the information and find the trends and come up with better concepts. And I think that's really the key is just doing the right exercises. And it's probably the stuff that you guys have been teaching them. It's, the value of looking at the marketplace, the value of looking at the users, the value of looking at the business and what its key attributes are, and bringing all that together to create stuff that's well informed. And it's probably making the right decisions around the products. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, as someone who's been observing Mike, it's definitely watching someone who makes educated choices and does them on the fly and very quickly. Like I do a company newsletter that keeps people informed on new designs and new trends and everything, and that's kind of just my way of keeping myself informed. And Mike is always sending me this is a new design thinking method, or this is a new manufacturing method, and all those things. So Mike definitely keeps on top of all the trends and makes appropriate choices for the right product. So it definitely comes down to just honing that choice and decision making.
And I'm not making these trends, I'm just staying on top of them. Huge companies out there building these trends and capturing them, like WGSN and that kind of thing. And I just scour through everything and find what's happening and making sure that what we're doing is relevant.
Well, let me just say, you guys are incredible. I really enjoyed that presentation. Just a moment when I thought I knew enough about certain industries, I'm always surprised by what's going on and the incredible work that people are doing. So really, really impressive, amazing portfolio of products that you guys have been involved in. To be honest, I'm envious of what you guys do. It looks pretty exciting if you ask me. And congratulations on all your achievements. And most of all, thank you so much for devoting a little bit of your time here to inspire some students in our class. I'm sure a whole lot more of them watch the lecture recorded in their own leisure, whatever that time they may be, in midnight or super early in the morning. But we're very thankful for you guys for doing that. I really enjoyed it. Daniel certainly enjoyed it and joined us in the presentation as well. And I'm sure these students did here as well. So huge thank you on behalf of me and Dan and the students and entire La Trobe University. Keep up the great work, and looking forward to catching up with you guys for a coffee on this coronavirus.
That's right.
Allowed to do so. It'll be a pleasure to take you guys out for a coffee. It's the least we can do. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
No
Thanks.
worries.
Thanks, Eddie. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. See you guys.